Hey, what's going on guys, this is AndrewChicken and welcome back to another video. Maeve is an extremely fun and powerful flank champion with robust mobility, solid damage, and a plethora of amazing skins. She can parkour through any battlefield with incredible agility, and wipe out any target with some decent practice. However, she's not exactly the easiest champion to get into, and there are plenty of techniques to learn on the way to mastering Maeve, which is why in this guide, I'll be going over my tips, tricks, and loadouts to help you improve at Maeve, the slippery cat burglar of the flank class. In the making of this guide, I got a bit of help from Vyktoryah, one of the best Maeve players I know who has her own YouTube channel where she uploads some fantastic Maeve gameplay. I'll leave a link to her channel in the description, you should definitely go check it out. And while you're down there, make sure to subscribe to this channel too for more guides to come in the future. But without further ado, let's get straight into the video. As always, let's start off with an overview of her base kit before we dive into her loadouts and gameplay tips. Maeve is an extremely agile flank who uses her exceptional mobility to her advantage as she zips around the battlefield and wipes out her enemies. One thing to note before we get started is that Maeve has a passive ability which allows her to double jump, or jump a second time while you're already in the air. This works nicely with her other movement abilities and complements her agile playstyle very nicely. Her primary fire is her daggers, which is a very strange weapon to say the least. She fires a 2-round burst of projectiles that each deal 400 damage, and they travel relatively fast with a slight arc to them. They don't have as steep of an arc as many other projectiles like Makoas or Pips, and they're fast, but not quite close to hit scan. These can be a difficult weapon to pick up at first, but once you get used to leading them on a target at longer distances, they are not that hard to use. What's nice about her daggers is that you never have to reload, but they only do 800 damage per second if you hit both daggers consistently. There are ways to make her a bit burstier however, as we'll see in just a moment. Maeve's next ability is her Pounce, which causes her to quickly dash forward in whatever direction you point your crosshairs, making it a good option for vertical and horizontal mobility alike. If you collide with an enemy however, you'll deal 400 damage to them and bounce backwards off of them. Sometimes it's helpful to use this ability to finish off a target if they're low, but most of the time you want to try and use this ability for movement, either to reach a higher up platform, escape from a sticky situation, or juke an enemy you're fighting. One last thing to know about Pounce is that it resets your double jump passive, so if you double jump, then pounce, you'll be able to jump again without needing to touch the ground. This works really well for getting some great airtime, especially in conjunction with her other two abilities. Pounce is augmented by two different talents, Rogue's Gambit, which resets the cooldown of her Pounce whenever she gets an elimination and increases the damage of her Pounce by 10%, and Street Justice, which causes her Pounce to execute targets at or below 35% health. Rogue's Gambit is my personal favorite talent, because it gives her some wicked mobility as long as she's getting kills. And the nice thing about this talent is that you don't necessarily need to land the killing blow in order to get the cooldown reduction. As long as the target you've shot dies, you'll get another Pounce, which is pretty helpful. Street Justice is incredibly good to use against tanks, because it can deal upwards of 1000 damage to some tanks when they get low. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're going up against a Yaggaroth and a Rom in a match, you know which talent to run. This is also just a generally good talent if you like to use your Pounce as a finisher move, because it guarantees that a low HP target will die. However, I must mention that you might get a bit of hate for running this talent, especially from tank players who view it as unfair. That shouldn't stop you from running the talent though, unless you don't like making people upset. If you want to watch the world burn though, this talent is for you. Her next movement ability is Prowl, which grants Maeve a movement speed increase and jump boost for 5 seconds. You move 50% faster by default, but you can increase this movement speed with one of her cards. This can be a great ability to use when you need to chase down a target or get somewhere quickly, but you do have to keep in mind that if you shoot or use any other ability while Prowl is active, your Prowl will be cancelled early. So you can't shoot and use Prowl at the same time, which means you have to be careful when you use Prowl so as not to waste it by immediately shooting at someone or using your Pounce. You also constantly make noise while you're using Prowl, so it can be tricky sneaking up on a target with this ability. Ideally, you want to use the element of surprise to make it so that when you're prowling closer to a target, you're attacking them from a direction they're not already looking towards, and you can land the first shot before they notice you and turn around. You can also get some great value out of wall jumping when using Prowl to get some insane airtime out of this ability. If you didn't already know, when you're right next to a wall and then you look at that wall, you jump significantly higher than if you were to jump away from that wall. This increased jump height from Prowl stacks with the increased jump height from walls, which means you can use these two mechanics together to jump really, really high. If you're using Prowl in an actual game and running near a wall, you can quickly flick to the wall, jump or double jump, and then flick back to the direction you were aiming for some really nice vertical mobility. This can be helpful in a lot of situations where you need to get up high but don't want to use a pounce, or you just want to look cool. Either way, this is helpful to know about. Prowl is augmented by the talent Cat Burglar, which causes her next 2 shots after ending Prowl to deal 30% more damage, or 240 more damage for the next 2 shots if you land both your daggers. This is a really helpful talent, because it allows Maeve to 2-shot squishy champions at around 2000 health, and champions that have slightly more health can be finished off with just a pounce. Maeve's last ability before her ultimate is her 9 lives, which is a really powerful ability to have. This ability resets the cooldown of her Pounce and Prowl completely, and it also heals her for 400, which is a nice bit of self-sustain built into her kit. This ability can be further augmented with her cards to give extra healing or damage reduction if you so choose, which makes it a really nice ability to quickly reset your cooldowns and retreat from a super sticky situation. However, you want to be extra deliberate with when you use this ability, because it has a lengthy 20-second cooldown. You don't want to be wasteful with this ability, because if you use it at the wrong time when your other abilities are almost back, or when you still have one of your abilities, then spam out your refresh ability so everything you have is on cooldown, you won't be a very effective flank and you're putting yourself at risk of dying because you used up all your cooldowns. This is a powerful ability, but you need to be careful not to waste it. Anyways, her final ability is her ultimate, Midnight. This is a super helpful ultimate for enabling you and your team to earn some easy kills, because it blinds all enemies within a 300 unit radius for 4 seconds. While this ultimate is active, enemies can only see what's happening within a 30 unit radius around them, so if you attack them from outside that radius, they'll have no idea where you are. Of course, they can still hear you and see where your projectiles are coming from, so experienced players with good game sense can still try and kill you, but it's still pretty difficult. Another helpful thing with his ultimate is that enemies affected by moonlight have a purple circle around them, which denotes the range from which they can start to see you. Not only is this helpful for showing you how close you can get to a target, but it can also reveal where an enemy is hiding behind a wall, since the circle extends far past where the enemies actually are. This is super valuable, because it means Maeve's ult doubles as a de facto Cassie ult to some extent. However, Maeve's ult does count as a form of crowd control, so you have to be careful when fighting enemies who have resilience or who have crowd control immunity abilities like a Nara with Mother's Grace, because those people might get out of your ult sooner than expected and start angrily shooting you down. Abilities that cleanse effects like Damba's Slither or Koga's dashes can also remove your blinding effect, so do keep that in mind. Also, if you die while your ultimate is active, it will instantly remove the blind effect from the enemies, so try not to die while ulting. Lastly, her ultimate has a bit of a wind-up animation to it, so it won't cast immediately. During this time, you can't use other abilities, so be careful not to press your ultimate button while you're already engaged with a target. Luckily, it won't consume your ultimate charge until the animation is complete, so if you die while the animation is still spinning, you won't lose your ultimate. Ideally, you want to use this ultimate when your teammates are alive and can capitalize on the blind enemies too, and you want to use it before you start to engage with a target, ideally behind cover but close enough to the enemies to where you can immediately start attacking. Also, don't use your ultimate in the middle of a prowl. It will cancel your prowl, making it harder for you to engage with the enemies instead of if you had just waited to prowl until after using your ult.
Alright, now let's get into the different loadouts for Maeve. Let's start off with the Cat Burglar build, because this is the talent you'll usually want to run with Maeve when there's a bunch of squishy champions to annihilate, since it gives you that extra burst you need to two-shot certain champions. Sixth Sense is a card that's just super helpful to use no matter what build you're running. It gives you an instant burst with 20% damage reduction just by pouncing, which can mean the difference between life and death if you're playing against some sniper or a super high burst champion. Predation is also a super good card to use in a Cat Burglar build, since it reduces the cooldown of Prowl each time you hit an enemy with your daggers. This makes it so you'll have your bonus damage from Prowl available more frequently, which is just super helpful. You don't necessarily need to run it at level 5 though, since the difference between 1 second per hit and 0.8 seconds per hit is negligible. And next we have Chase, which increases your movement speed by an additional 30% while using Prowl. This is super helpful for chasing down targets, as the name might suggest, but it also helps you run faster and pretty much do whatever you need to do with Prowl faster. It's just fun and useful card to have. And the other cards are pretty much fillers and can be tailored to your personal taste. I like using Street Cred as a filler in just about any loadout because, you can't go wrong with extra health. And On Edge is also there because, why not?
Cat Burglar is a fantastic talent because it makes your next 2 shots deal a total of 1040 damage instead of just 800. Anyone below 2080 health gets 2 shot by this talent if they don't get healed, which cuts back on the time it takes to kill a target by 1 second. This makes it substantially easier to engage, get a kill, and get out quickly, or get in, kill one target quickly, then go finish off another target if you can. Now, champions above 2080 health can also be quickly finished off with just a pounce, which is often faster than firing off a third set of daggers. However, you have to be careful with using your pounces as a finisher when you're not running Rogue's Gambit, because if you decide to use it as a finisher, you won't have that pounce to retreat or engage on a second target. Still, it's not the worst thing in the world to use the pounce as a finisher, and save that extra half a second that the enemy would have to dish out more damage to you. Generally, you want to begin your engagement on a target with your prowl, so you can quickly close the distance, then start firing on them with your heavy-hitting daggers. What I like to do is prowl, hit a set of daggers, then quickly pounce in the air above a target, flick back to them, and then land the second set of daggers. Then you can either fire a third set of daggers, or use 9 lives, get your pounce back, and finish them with that. Then, use prowl to retreat. As Maeve, it's super important to know when you should engage with a target. Keep in mind that Maeve can poke for 800 damage at any range with her daggers, so you don't necessarily need to be right up in an enemy's face to whittle their health away. You can play it safe and wait for someone to get low, then use your prowl to engage and finish them off. Also, don't forget about wall jumps with your prowl, because those can be useful for getting some impressive jump height to reach a high up platform or get a better vantage point on an enemy. As a flank, your job is to quickly dive in to finish off a weak or vulnerable target when they're otherwise distracted, and then get away once the enemies notice you. Don't just dive a backline with 2 or 3 people in it, all watching each other's back. If you can get an enemy alone or you can pick off the weakest of the enemies in a bunch, you'll be doing your team a big favor. Usually, you'll want to save your 9 lives for when you need your abilities back so you can run away from a dodgy situation. After engaging with Prowl and Pounce and getting a kill, you can use 9 lives to restore your abilities and get back to safety, assuming of course that the enemies are pressuring you to the point that you might die. Sometimes, you might not even get a kill before needing to retreat, and that's fine. If you've engaged with a target, you're forcing their attention onto you, and sometimes drawing the attention of other enemies too. This can open up an opportunity for your teammates to strike, finishing off a kill you couldn't get safely, or otherwise just pressuring the enemies back. If you know you can finish off an enemy safely and still have an ability to retreat with, then you should still take out that target. Just don't push in too far, because if you dive too deep into the enemy backline, you'll be stranded with multiple enemies trying to hunt you down.
Next, let's talk about Rogue's Gambit, the talent that's super fun for having some absolutely insane mobility. Again, we have 6 cents in this build, which just makes perfect sense for Rogue's Gambit since it gives you even more pounces than usual to work with. We also have Scamper, which is another really good card to run in this build. What Scamper allows you to do is pounce to an enemy to execute, then flick your crosshairs 180 degrees and pounce away, getting 2 procs of increased movement speed in a really short amount of time. While there are some diminishing returns involved, this card will still let you run away insanely quickly, without having to use Prowl. And if you don't do this combo, you'll still just have some good movement speed regardless of how you use your pounce. Chase is also in this build for the same reason as the Cat Burglar build. It's just a really good card to have. And of course, Savagery is another card that just makes perfect sense in a Rogue's Gambit build. You get more pounces, which means you get more healing out of the card than you would with a different talent. It's just great.
Now, Rogue's Gambit is my personal favorite talent because of all the extra mobility it provides. You get the cooldown on your pounce completely reset just for getting an elimination. You don't even need to land the killing blow. This talent gives Maeve way more airtime than her other talents as long as she can get an elimination, and what it enables you to do is engage with an enemy, use your pounce as a movement ability to juke them, and once you kill that enemy, you've got another pounce ready to go to engage with another target or get away. No fuss with 9 lives unless you're in a really tight situation, just get a kill and pounce away. It's so nice. Now of course, this does come at the cost of not having the same burst as Cat Burglar. For most enemies, you'll need to fire 3 sets of daggers to kill them, but for someone who has around 2000 health, you can fire 2 sets of daggers, finish them with the pounce, and then have another pounce ready to escape. Most of the time, you'll be using your pounces as a movement ability, dashing around to juke enemies, chase a target, or evade some huge damage. If an enemy is really close to you and you need to quickly dodge some damage but you don't want to risk accidentally hitting an enemy and bouncing off of them, I suggest flicking your crosshairs straight up into the air and pouncing that way. Most of the time, you won't end up accidentally hitting the enemy, and you'll dodge whatever scary damage was aimed at where you were. This can get predictable though, so if the enemies aren't super close to you, you can pounce up and to the left or right of where the enemies are, trying to switch it up each time. Moving unpredictably with Maeve is key, which brings me to another important point with Maeve. As Maeve, you don't need to constantly be jumping. It's surprisingly easy to track a Maeve who's constantly double jumping, since Maeve has barely any air control while jumping, just like any other champion. It's much easier to strafe when you're not always jumping around, although the occasional jump can be helpful to be unpredictable. Of course, if you're fighting someone like Eve or Drogos, it is actually pretty helpful to jump around because it's harder for them to hit you, but in most cases, staying on the ground so you can strafe better is key. If you're fighting Drogos, there's a pretty fun way to get just as much airtime as him, if not more. To do this, you have to double wall jump with your prowl, then shoot. Pounce, shoot, then jump again. Use 9 lives and pounce again. Shoot, then jump. If you've managed to kill him and you're using Rogue's Gambit, you'll have a third pounce which you can use, shoot, then jump again, before finally falling to the ground. This gives you some absolutely silly airtime, but do keep in mind that it isn't particularly difficult for a skilled hit-scan player to shoot you out of the sky while you do this, just like they would into Drogo's. Still though, this is a fun, flashy way to get a kill that looks really good to pull off.
Lastly, let's talk about the bane of tank players everywhere, Street Justice. Most of the time, you don't want to go with this talent, but it can be helpful when there are a bunch of tanks to fight, especially tanks with massive health pools like Yaggorath or Rom. This loadout is very similar to the Rogue's Gambit build, with 6th Sense 5 for that sweet damage reduction, but we also have the Shred card to help you get more uptime on your pounces, whereas the Rogue's Gambit loadout can get away with not using this card, since you have your pounce back for getting a kill. This loadout needs the extra cooldown reduction because you have no way to reset it otherwise. Other than that, the rest of this build is just about the same as the Rogue's Gambit build, with Savagery, Chase, and Street Cred, just some super solid cards for this type of build. Savagery is 1 level lower than in the Rogue's Gambit build because that extra point is invested into Shred, but otherwise Chase remains the same and Street Cred is the level 1 filler.
Now, if you like using your pounce as a reliable finisher, this talent is great for that purpose. Against squishy champions, it only increases your pounce damage by about 200 damage, but it's an alternative to Cat Burglar that enables you to fire 2 sets of daggers at an opponent, then finish them with pounce. The reason this is so powerful against tanks is because it executes targets below 35% health, which is oftentimes well over 1,000 health for tanks. For certain tanks like Makoa during ult, Rom, and Yaggorath, you can get some absolutely monstrous pounces equivalent to a sniper headshot, but without all the effort of aiming for the head. This is why so many tank players hate this talent, because her pounce, which has a rather short cooldown, is capable of executing them quickly and effortlessly. If you see a low HP tank with a glowing red symbol on them, just pounce on them, no fuss. While this talent is very effective, you will absolutely make some people angry by using it. If you don't like making people mad, I suggest just going Cat Burglar or Rogue's Gambit most of the time. Still, against 2 beefy tanks, this talent is just valuable enough that I would suggest using it despite the anger you'll invoke in your enemies. Now, let's talk a bit about Maeve's good maps and matchups. Maeve is not a flexible champion in the same way Xin is, where Xin hardly has any bad matchups. There are quite a few different champions who you either want to avoid fighting if they're good players, or fight carefully otherwise. In general, tanks are very scary for Maeve. Even if you go Street Justice, you don't usually want to engage with a tank when they're at full health. Maeve only deals 800 damage per second, which means she'll take forever to kill a tank, especially on top of the damage reduction, shields, and deployables tanks have on top of their massive health pools. Maeve also has a few bad matchups in other classes too. Xiaolin is just horrible to fight against. He can hit Maeve with a 1300 damage cripple, making it so she can't escape and also nuking her health pool. You have to be very careful when you fight him, always making sure to land the first shot if you can. You want to have a quick and easy escape option with your pounce, and get resilience if you can so that his cripple traps you for less time. Similarly, Leon is hard to fight with Maeve because part of Maeve's survivability comes from her ability to be extremely evasive, juking enemies, and generally just being hard to hit. Leon doesn't care about that at all, since her auto-aim can wipe out 2/5 of her health or more with her auto-aim combos, and if a Leon is competent at aiming too, it can be extremely annoying to fight Leon. However, Maeve can defeat both Leon and Xiaolin with just 2 sets of daggers if they're not running a health card at a substantial level, using Cat Burglar, since Leon and Xiaolin both have just 2000 health. So, if you can get the first shot off in a fight and outlast some of their bursts, it is possible to defeat both of these champions. You just need to be extra careful when fighting them, and if they're continuously pummeling you in duels, try and have someone on your team come with you to fight them, or just focus on another enemy instead. Buck is also rather hard for Maeve to battle, because both champions have similar DPS at close quarters, but Buck is one of the tankiest flanks in the game, with some powerful self-sustain and damage reduction. He can also slow Maeve, which just makes him even more annoying. Try and be as evasive as possible when fighting him, and outrange him, because Maeve does far more damage than Buck at long range. You also don't want to engage on multiple grouped up healers who are healing each other in the early stages of the game. Once you have significant cauterize, it's easier to fight grouped up healers, but in the early stages of the game, you don't have enough DPS to take them out. Instead, you can farm up credits from a distance by dealing damage, and try and catch them when they're split up or isolated. Or again, just go fight someone who isn't near them to be healed. There are also certain maps that Maeve is better on than others. Serpent Beach, Stone Keep, Timbermill, and generally any other map that has plenty of vertical platforms and walls are all fantastic options for Maeve, since she can benefit heavily from her superb vertical mobility and ambush the enemies from plenty of different routes. However, she's not as good on maps like Frog Isle, Jaguar Falls, or Ice Mines, where flank routes are limited and there's not many places for her vertical mobility to shine. On those maps, you're better off just picking someone like Xin or Lex, who have more burst and shine on more horizontal maps. You can still sometimes make Maeve work on these maps, but they're not your best options. Last, let's talk about items. As with all other flankers, you'll want a significant amount of cauterize before anything else, so you can have an easier time killing things. Pretty much all the defensive items are good on Maeve depending on the situation, and resilience is especially important when going into cripples like Power Cosmium Genos, Grover's Roots, or Shaolin's Cripple Arrows. You do not want to be crippled as Maeve, because cripples can often be a death sentence to hypermobile champions like Maeve. The best healing item in most cases is Kill to Heal, because her DPS isn't really high enough to warrant life rip, you won't usually get healed that often by your healers, and Veteran is just pointless to buy on low health champions. Nimble is also really good on Maeve to move even faster than you already are, and Chronos can be helpful for more uptime on all your abilities. In some cases, Master Riding can be helpful for getting behind the enemies faster, but it's not a super high priority item. Morale Boost is an item, I guess. It's not too important for her. And of course, the single most important item you could possibly buy with Maeve is Deft Hands, the best item in the game and your first purchase in any game you play with Maeve. But anyways, that's going to be the end of the video. Did this Maeve guide help you out in some way? If it did, make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe for more content like this from me in the future. Also make sure to check out the Discord server linked in the description to become a part of our active community of over 1,000 members. I also stream regularly on Twitch, so make sure to follow me there as well. Lastly, I want to give a huge shout out to the members of the channel for helping to support my content. If you want to support the channel and gain access to some fun emojis to use on comments and an exclusive role in the Discord server, then just click the join button right next to the subscribe button. It's cheap and it helps out a lot. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Vyktoryah, who helped me out when making this guide. Anyways, I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.